Good afternoon, my friends. Today we are going to be continuing to study the Laws of Studying Torah, chapter 4 in the Rambam, and he's going to be telling us what is the proper way that Torah should be taught by a teacher to his students, and how should a person be when they are studying Torah. Very fascinating set of laws. Join me along. So the Rambam begins by saying that in general, the Torah should be taught. When we have a teacher teaching Torah, the teacher should make sure that all his students are good students. They're students that they have a good behavior outside of the study hall. It's not that they're coming to study over here and then once they leave they're not acting in a proper behavior, but rather a teacher should only be teaching students who are befitting to be studying Torah. And if you have a student which is going in an improper way, so then the teacher should first see what's going on and bring them back to the right, correct path of behavior. And once they are back and they're in a proper behavior, then they should be able to continue to study with everyone else in the study hall. And our sages say that whoever teaches an improper student is considered as if he throws a stone to Mercury. As it says in Proverbs, as one who winds a stone in a sling, so is he who gives honor to a fool. And when we're talking about honor, it goes to regard the idea of the study of Torah. And as it says, the wise shall inherit honor, which refers to the study of Torah. So, in other words, we find the idea that a student has to be a proper student in order to be able to study Torah. But also, it goes the other way around. It's a two-way street. Also, the teacher also has to be a proper teacher. Then their behavior has to be in a proper way. If outside of the classroom the teacher is behaving in an inappropriate way, as befitting to a Torah teacher specifically, so then it is not correct to be studying under their guidance, but rather we do not study under them, and we find a new teacher. As it says in the verse, for the priest's lips shall keep knowledge, and they shall seek the Torah from his mouth, because he is a messenger of Hashem. And he's the messenger from the Lord of hosts, as it says. So our sages say, if a teacher resembles a messenger of the Lord of hosts, he's a befitting messenger to be the one that is going to be giving you over the words of God. So then you should seek Torah from that person. But if not, then do not. So, what is the correct way for the Torah to be taught? Physically, how should, if we are sitting in a study hall, in a yeshiva, where the Torah is being taught, and you have a teacher and you have many students. So the Rambam says that the proper way for everyone to be seated is that the teacher should be able to see everyone who he's teaching. So you have the teacher sitting up front, and then you have all the students sitting in like half a circle around the teacher, so that wherever he looks, he's going to be able to see all the students. And it's not proper that, and back in the day, they didn't use chairs in the same way as we use them today, and people would sit on the ground a lot. So he says that it's not proper that the teacher should be sitting on a chair and the students on the ground, but rather either everyone on the ground or everyone on chairs. And back in the day, originally they would teach, the teacher would sit, and then the students would be standing. But today, later on, it was changed that everyone is sitting, and that's the correct way to have it. Hi, Musia. You want to say hi? Musia, say hi. So, if the teacher was teaching and he wanted to teach it all on his own. In other words, he's going to be giving over all the information by himself. So then that's totally fine. And he's going to speak to he's going to be speaking to all the students and giving them over all the words of the Torah. But if the teacher wasn't someone that could raise his voice very loudly and he would rather that he should have an interpreter, that was definitely an option, and that was something which was done. And you had an interpreter the teacher would start off by giving the class. He would give over a paragraph of information, and then the interpreter would interpret it. And he would say word for what the teacher said, but he would say it loudly, because if in a big study hall where you have hundreds of students, it was very hard for the teacher to raise his voice. And the teacher shouldn't raise his voice too loudly, higher than how the interpreter does it, because then the interpreter will be out of a job. So the teacher speaks in his regular tone, and then the interpreter will say it loudly for everyone to listen. And the interpreter has to say it word for word. Everything, you shouldn't add, you shouldn't change it, unless he was a greater sage, but then that's a different story. And if someone has a question, so then they ask the question to the interpreter, and the interpreter tells it over to the rabbi. The rabbi will answer to the interpreter, and the interpreter will pass it on back to the crowd. So, in other words, everything will go through the interpreter. And if the rabbi mentions something which a teaching from his own father, so since it is not proper for someone to mention their father's name, so the rabbi will say that this is how my father taught this and this law. And then the interpreter is allowed to say the name of the person, because it's only because he's not allowed to mention his own father's name, so therefore he doesn't mention it. So he's allowed to change in that respect, but anything beyond that, he should not change. If a teacher is teaching, and the students are sitting there, and they're just not understanding what he's trying to tell them. He's trying to explain them this law, and they're just not getting it. The teacher should not become upset, but rather he should teach it to them even a few times, even many times, until they understand it properly. And so too also a student shouldn't say, oh, well, I understand it, even though he doesn't really understand it. So a person shouldn't do that, because even if he's going to tell the rabbi many times, the rabbi is going to try to explain it to him many times, and he still doesn't understand it, he should not be embarrassed, and he should say, I don't understand, and it's the Torah, and I have to study it, so please, can you explain it again? And the rabbi should do it gladly. And a person shouldn't be embarrassed to say, I don't understand, even though his friends, they're studying with him in this class, they're understanding at the first go. So a student should not be embarrassed, and as it says in the Mishnah, that a embarrassed person will never learn, and a short-tempered teacher should not teach. So that's a very important thing. But that's all in the case where the student is actually trying very hard to understand it. But if the teacher is seeing that the students are not understanding it because they're just not applying themselves properly, and they're playing around and they're wasting their time, so then the teacher should be very strict with them and should tell them that they have to take their study seriously. As it says, our sages says, you should cast fear into the students so that they should listen properly. And because of that reason, so therefore a teacher should be respected in the eyes of the students. So the teacher shouldn't act frivolously and should not party with his students, so to speak, by eating and drinking with them, so that they should have a certain sense of fear and awe of the teacher, so that they should listen properly during the class. When a teacher is teaching on a certain topic, so first of all, when a teacher comes into the study hall, the students should wait, if they have questions and they want to ask the teacher a question, they should wait until the rabbi comes in and he sits down and he's relaxed and he's able to gather his thoughts and concentration, and then they're able to come and ask that question, and he can give them a good answer. And similarly, if they're studying a certain topic, a student shouldn't come and ask him on a totally different, disconnected topic, because first of all, they're studying this topic right now, but also maybe the teacher hasn't studied this thoroughly, and he might be embarrassed by not knowing the right answer. So that's an interesting law. Similarly, on the other hand, the teacher is allowed to ask his students on other topics which they are not studying in order to sharpen them and make sure that they are studying properly, and to test them in various ways to see where they're holding in their study. So the teacher should always be on the ball to make sure that the students are properly comprehending and understanding what they are teaching their students. When a person comes to ask a question, or when a person is answering a question in study, you should never do it while they are standing. Because when a person is standing, not necessarily is he concentrating as well. So therefore, should be sitting down, and we should be a person who asks a question should do it with the proper awe, and shouldn't ask. And the Rambam says, interesting thing, a person shouldn't ask too many questions on one thing which they are studying. And he says, for every topic of study, a person should only ask in regards to 3 halachot, in regards to 3 laws. In other words, I guess not to make the teacher too crazy. But it's an interesting law. Now, if you have 2 students, and one comes and asks the question in the topic in regards to what they are studying, and one comes and asks the question in regards to a totally different topic, so you answer the one who is asked on this topic over here. Similarly, if someone asked in regards to an abstract concept, and someone is asking in regards to a practical thing that we have to know to day-to-day life, so then you should answer the one who is practical. And so too also, so there are various things. If someone is coming to ask in regards to a way of study that is more agadic and midrashic, and one is a form of studying to understand to understand one thing from another thing, where we're trying to understand the practical thing. So too also you should heed to that one first, and not to the one that is asking on the midrash or the agada. If one is a greater student and he's a greater sage, so then you should answer him first. If one is a simple person and one is a student who is part of the yeshiva, and one is not a student in the yeshiva, so then you should first answer the student. And if it's equal, so then it's up to the rabbi to decide in what order to answer the questions. One should not sleep in a house of study because a Torah hall of study is a very holy place, and the Rambam says that it's actually holier than a synagogue. It's holier than a place of prayer. The room of study is greater, the holiness of that room is greater than a synagogue, and therefore a person should always be very careful of how they act, even more than in a synagogue. Because, so for instance, a person shouldn't go to sleep in a study hall. So too also persons shouldn't be talking, idle words or things that are not connected to their study. So much so that even if a person sneezes and we say bless you or to your recovery, as the Rambam says, a person should refrain from speaking and saying even that. That's how important and cautious we have to be when we are in a house of study, to only speak things that are connected to our study, things that are matters that are connected to the Torah, and not things that are other matters. Although they might be good things, but they're just not the proper place and time for them. So that is the chapter of Rambam for today, the Laws of Studying Torah. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we will be in touch. See you tomorrow.